This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, we have one of my favorite politicians. He's not a politician, he's a statesman. One of my favorite guys in Alabama politics, our state treasurer, Young Boozer. A lot of y'all just consider him just plain Young Boozer, but he's Young Boozer III. And I'm going to tell y'all a little bit about his history. He's not only one of the most qualified people I've ever seen in the office to be state treasurer. If you had to draw up a resume, when he ran for state treasurer in 2010, I wrote this in my column statewide that if you had him in the merit system, you put his resume in there, they would select him. Very few times you have that happen, but he had a perfect background in banking. Young has an undergraduate degree from Stanford, a master's in finance from Wharton School in Pennsylvania, two of the finest finance schools in America. Spent a career in banking here in Montgomery with the old Colonial Bank and several other banks. In San Francisco, all the places around the country. And he's honored the state by being the state treasurer. He was elected in 2010, and he was reelected overwhelmingly in 2014. He's in the midst of his second four-year term as state treasurer. Can't run again, y'all. He's only been treasurer 8 years. He got a succession law. But I know him as Young Boozer III. I never knew his grandfather, of course. His grandfather was in the lumber business and grew up in Sampson, was the mayor of Sampson in Geneva County, and died at a young age, I think influenza or something like that. A lot of guys died of influenza back then. And then his father, Young Boozer II, was quite a legendary icon. He went to the University of Alabama, became a star football player, played both ways as a running back and defensive back, and played with Bear Bryant, y'all. Bear Bryant and Young Boozer were classmates and teammates at the Crimson Tide. And when Alabama got on the national scene for the first time, went to the Rose Bowl, they played Stanford out on the West Coast, and I don't know what the score was. One of them was 27-13. That may have been that one. But anyway, they won the national championship, beat Stanford, and his daddy intercepted the pass that saved the game. And then his daddy went on to become one of the most successful businessmen in the state. Started Colonial Life Insurance Company in Tuscaloosa, and later merged with Alpha, and I think he probably was in business ventures with Bear Bryant and several other business ventures.
It was.
There in Tuscaloosa. But I've taken a lot of Young's thunder, but I guess as state treasurer, Young Boozer III, that gives y'all a little background on Young. Ironically, him going to Stanford, his daddy was a star of the Stanford Rose Bowl game, and what did he say when you told me you're going to Stanford, Young?
Well, we got it down to a short list, and the short list was Princeton, Alabama, and Stanford. I told him I was going to go to Stanford, and he said, "That's fine. You're going to get a great education there," and we beat them anyway.
I knew your daddy, you know.
I know you did.
The first time I met you, you were out in California. You'd come back for some time. And,
yep.
But you're doing a good job as treasurer, Young. Tell our folks kind of what all the treasurer does day to day. I mean, what's your day like over there? And one of the biggest things you manage is the PAC program. So tell us about your day, and then get into some of the PAC issues, if you would.
I'd be happy to do that. First of all, I'm responsible for cash management for the state. So we take in over $100 million a day on average. We invest a pool of about $3 billion, and some of that's invested overnight. Some that could be invested for as long as a year or two. But all of that is basically invested based upon when it's going to be needed by the state or by the particular agency or department. We're also in charge of bond management. We have the SAFE program. We're in charge of unclaimed property.
The SAFE program, what's that?
The SAFE program is a program that was set up about 15 years ago. And it basically is a program that insures against loss any state, county, or city deposits that are in a bank. So it's a program that actually I had something to do with designing and implementing and getting it passed into law. If a bank were to fail, FDIC insurance covers that deposit up to $250,000, and then anything above that has to be insured. This program ensures that. It's been in place for 15 years. We've had 9 bank failures in that time period, and nobody's ever lost a penny. So it has actually worked and worked very well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also responsible for 2 college savings programs.
Let's get back. We skipped over the thing about the unclaimed
property. Sure.
Let's talk about that, because before the show, Carolyn Hudson, who has a popular radio show, was talking to you about that, and came in and gave you accolades for one of her relatives getting recovered $2,500.
That's right.
I mean, that's a lot of money, you know. I mean, she gave you credit for the unclaimed property. Explain that whole program to our viewers, if you would.
I'd love to. This is the most fun thing that I do. Nothing gives us more pleasure than reuniting people with their own money. And these are some amazing numbers. Within the state of Alabama, there's over $600 million in unclaimed property. Now, unclaimed property can be an old bank account that you forgot about and the bank's lost contact with you.
Probably a good many of those, isn't there?
Most of the money that we get is from banks, and it's abandoned accounts. So it could be as little as $1, it could be $1,000, it could be $10,000.
What's the most you've ever seen, you remember?
Well,
off the top of your head?
I'll get to that in a second, okay? But that's a great question, is that bank accounts are usually relatively small. We also, they're required to turn over property that is in a safe deposit box that hasn't been accessed for the 3-year period. So sometimes we get pictures and letters and wills and guns and knives and wedding rings and jewelry and all this kind of stuff. We're required to hold it for about a year to try to see if we can find the person that owns it. If we can't, then we have an auction and we auction it off, and whatever we get for it becomes the amount of money that the individual would receive. Now, the interesting thing is that once we've done that, it is able to be received by that individual forever. So there's no time limit on it. There is a lifetime component of this. If that person passes away, the money still stays in that individual's name, but it can be claimed by a relative, a rightful heir. We also get accounts from brokerage firms, and this is where the big one came in, is that since I've been treasurer, probably in the 2nd year, I would think, we got an account turned over to us by an investment banking firm that was over $1 million.
Well, now, somebody bound to know who that $1 million who belonged to.
Well, you would think that it would happen, and we actually...
How would they lose the owner of $1 million?
There had been mergers in the investment banking business, and the person who had originally started it went to another company. He forgot about it. They were sending letters back to the old address, and they just weren't responding, and so they said, well, gosh, we've lost contact with this guy. We're going to turn it over to the state. Well, when they turned it over to us, we actually recognized who it was.
I would think so.
Immediately got in touch with them and were able to get it back.
Well, they were still living and everything.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, now, young, some of this stuff, if somebody has a safe deposit box, it's in their name, so it's easy to find out. The bank doesn't try to do any due diligence to try to find who it belongs to.
They do. So the bank is required to, let me tell you how it gets turned over. There's a 3-year period. So if it could apply to a bank account or it could apply to a safe deposit box. If the bank loses contact with that person for a 3-year period, and losing contact basically means I send you a statement to your existing address and it comes back to me. If I can't find your forwarding address or forwarded address, then I've lost contact with you and I'm required to turn it over to the state. So, somebody could move out of state, somebody could forget about it, somebody could just be negligent and not turn it over. The bank is then required to send it to us, and then we begin looking for that individual first at that old address, but then we have a whole bunch of different methods that we can use to try to find out where you are after that. The interesting thing, this is a big deal because we have over $600 million in unclaimed property. It represents about 5.5 million individual claims. So if you can do the math, it's only about $110 average. Sometimes we get...
Most of them in goods or money?
Most of them are in cash, yes. And some of them can be as little as 15 cents. Somebody has a dividend check that went to their old address, they forgot about it, and these things have accumulated at the bank or at the investment banking firm, and they get turned over to us. So it could be really small or it could be large, like the one I mentioned earlier.
Well, it wasn't hard to find somebody more than $1 million back.
It was a little easier.
What did y'all do? Look and say, this belongs to so-and-so?
We gave them a call and said, we got this record from XYZ and you need to claim it. And I said, be happy to.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, interrupted by the unclaimed property, but that is the interesting aspect. Now, y'all have sales periodically, or
we do. And what I would do is I'd recommend to your viewers to do this, is to go to our website. It's treasury.alabama.gov. On the home page, there'll be a listing on the left-hand side. Click on unclaimed property, and it'll take you to our website. And all you got to do is put in 3 pieces of information: last name, first name, and city. Hit request, and it'll let you know if we have something in your name and your city on our records. And then if that is the case, you can apply for a claim form online, fill it out, send it in, and we can turn it back around to you.
so a lot of the unclaimed property gets claimed pretty quickly.
Some of it does. No, I would say probably in the range of 30 to 35%. And then, if, as we were talking, if you went into a safe deposit box and we couldn't find the rightful owner, we would then put it up for auction for sale. You can also, on our website, go to the auction portion of it, click on that, and see what is online and available for sale.
What about rings and stuff like guns? Y'all have a hard time finding those, don't you? And you put, how do you determine the price of those? Do you put a bottom on how much you'll sell it for? Do you have anybody come in and praise them and that sort of thing?
The process is we turn them over to the auction house. The auction house does an appraisal on those kinds of items so that we have a reasonably good idea as to what they would sell for. We put them up for auction. It's an auction just like eBay. It'll have a certain time limit on it. At the end of the time, whatever the high bid is what it's worth. And that's what we record it as, so that if Aunt Tilly loses her jewelry and we sell it for $1,000, it'll be Aunt Tilly $1,000, and somebody's going to need to show up and claim that. We'd love to be able to keep everything, but it's a large amount. It's a huge volume. So we have to move that volume through the state's vaults.
Do you have employees that do nothing but that?
That's true.
How many people do you have in that department?
We have approximately 10 people in that department.
Where are they housed?
They're over in the RSA Union building.
But now, how many employees do you have all total?
30.
You probably lost employees since you began, haven't you?
Well, what we've done is we've right-sized the Treasurer's office. So when I took office, we had 46 people. We now have 30. We are more efficient. We're more cost-effective. We deliver as good or better, we think better, customer service than we did before. And the key thing to this is that when I came into office, the first 2 years I got prorated. I said, there's got to be a better way to do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce our expenses, put ourselves in the best possible position to be able to run this office. And a lot of people play games with the budget. So they'll say, my budget's $10 million. I'm going to reduce it by 10%, so I'm going to reduce my budget by $1 million. And that's good. So now their budget's $9 million, but that person may not be spending $9 million. They're spending 6 or 7, so it really doesn't impact them. Well, I don't look at things that way. When I got in there, I said, what am I spending? And I'm going to reduce that spending amount. So what we did was we got in, we saw what we needed to do. We had a number of people who were retiring, so we allowed them to retire. We then reorganized the Treasurer's office around that. And now we are actually spending on an annual basis $1 million a year less in cash. So we are much more efficient. We were ahead of the curve. The other thing that I did, I realized that there were a lot of problems with the general fund. So I figured out a way to fund the operation without general fund money. So I walked away from that. I told the people over there, Arthur Orr, et cetera, that I was going to be leaving the general fund. I used the cash flow from the unclaimed property operation in order to fund my operation on a cash basis.
Wow.
So it works out great. Plus, I'm a huge contributor through the unclaimed property operation for the general fund.
So it would be perplexing to someone who's looking at the state budget and say, where's the Treasurer's budget?
That's correct.
Do they even list it in the budget?
It is not listed in the general fund budget.
Well, so they just, now the other ones, don't have any way of doing that, though. Secretary of State wouldn't have any way to do that.
Every department is different, and I'm not familiar with all those, but I am, I may be one of the lucky ones, but I'm also one of the
More prudent ones.
I'll go with more prudent.
Yeah.
To say I've got other ways to do this, and it's a better way to do it, and so that's the way I'm going to transact my business.
Young, let's talk a little bit about the Alabama Trust Fund. That's been such a big topic of conversation over the years in the Treasurer's office. When you took office, give us a status of that fund, if you would, and where you are now, today, in late 2015.
I'd be happy to.
That's been 5.5 years you've been in office. You took over in January 2011.
That's correct.
What was the status of that account then?
At the time I took it over, I sat down and, well, actually I had a pretty good idea of what it was about because I was working as the Deputy Finance Director for Governor Riley. I knew that something needed to be done with it. It was improperly structured. It was a trust that was basically using its interest and dividends to fund the general fund, but it had some amendments to it that basically in effect would have been a statutory liquidation of the fund. They had the ability to strip out capital gains from the trust at the end of the year. That's not the way that you would want to run a trust fund like that. I got involved with it, had a discussion with Arthur Orr. He had one issue with it and said, well, I think that needs to get fixed, but I think there are a number of other things that need to be done. So he said, you think you can do that? And I said, I'll have it on your desk by Tuesday of next week. I did. He agreed to it, and it became the Constitutional Amendment of 2012, the one that we voted on in September. And what it did was, it basically redefined how the trust would work. It used to be an income trust. It is now a trust that we can manage on a total return basis. The way that the money was being spent, it didn't have a spending policy, so we devised a spending policy to establish what Forever Wild got, what Senior Services got, what the cities and the counties got, and also then what was left over for the general fund. I'm happy to say that today it is in the 21st century. The royalties that come into the Alabama Trust Fund, it's managed on a 65% equities basis and a 35% fixed income basis. We have a spending policy that allows us to spend 5% of a 3-year rolling average of the fund, plus a third of the amount of the royalties that come in. That represents about $150 million a year that goes out. That is a big improvement over what it used to be. It has also allowed us to better manage the fund. And in this time period, also what's happened, or through most of this time period, monies have been withdrawn from it. First, for the ETF rainy day account, which I'm happy to say has been paid back fully. There's been a $161 million general fund rainy day account that is still outstanding. And we also, in that constitutional amendment of 2012, not only did we restructure it, but also at the very last minute, the legislature decided to withdraw $437 million from it on an equal amounts for 3 years, which I was not.
Excuse me.
I was not for. As a matter of fact, when I heard that, I went to the governor and I went to the legislature and I said, "I'm a former banker. I'm more interested at the return of my principal rather than the return on my principal."
As Mark Twain said.
So what I will, and he's a smart man.
Yeah.
And so what I said was, "I'll loan you the money." And they said, "No, that's not an option we want to take." But shortly after that conversation, they came back to me and they said, "You know, Young, we do want to pay this back." And that became the first law that was passed in the next legislative session. So there is an amount owing of about 400 and...
They ain't paid it back yet.
They're paying it back a little bit at a time, but they owe the ATF about $600 million.
Are they paying back any interest on it?
No, it was interest-free. Once again, give me the principal back. I'll be happy with that. Now, we're at a point where we could have a great opportunity for the ATF, and that has to do with the BP settlement money. BP has said that they're going to settle for $1 billion for economic damages. And it's a settlement that's structured just exactly the way a chief financial officer would structure it. I'll give you a certain amount of money up front, and then we're going to string it out over an extended period of time.
Sorry.
So that the way it is proposed now is that we would perhaps get $200 million next summer. We would skip 2 years, and then we would get $53 million a year for the next 16 years. Well, if you take a present value of that, it's less than $1 billion. I go back to the story about I'll give you $1 million, and your choices are you can either have $1 million today, or I'll give you $1 a year for 1 million years. Which one are you going to take? Well, of course, you're going to take the money up front. So what we should do is we should enter into a financial transaction that allows us to get the present value of that. And it should be around $700 to $725 million. And you can get that next summer. So what you would do is pay back the ATF immediately. Take $600 million of that amount that you get, put it back in the ATF. Now what you get when you do that is you get an increase in assets of $600 million. Over a 3-year period, that'll be fully recognized in the calculation of the 5% payout. So you're going to get $30 million a year to the general fund through that. Plus, you will have $600 million in the ATF that will grow over time. And over an 18-year period, it ought at least double, if not do better than that. So you're looking at starting with $600 million and maybe ending up with $1.5 billion plus pour out this money to the general fund. That's a no-brainer from a finance point of view. You have to do that transaction.
Young, what about the 529 program? How's that going?
That's going very well. As you know, I've got 2 college savings programs. Let me start with the College Counts 529 program. It is doing very well. We're real proud of it. We have assets of $1.3 billion under management. It represents 74,000 accounts. We have a very good administrator in the Union Bank and Trust out of Lincoln, Nebraska. We've got some terrific investment options that include Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, Fidelity, etc. It's very affordable. People can open an account with nothing down, and if they want to put in a little bit on a monthly basis, they can do that. If they want to put it all in at once, they can do that too. The thing I'm most proud of, when I took office, Alabama accounts represented only $133 million of that amount. Today, Alabama accounts are $560 million. There are now 37,000 accounts. They represent 50% of the total accounts. That is huge growth, and that is it's a great vehicle for Alabamians to begin saving for their college, for their students' college education.
Let me ask you this question,
Yep.
and this is, I'm participating here. I'm just kind of a personal question. I've got one for my granddaughter, and I put aside a certain amount of money when she's only 4 years old. When she gets 18 years old, do I have control of that money, even though now the money I put in there is not tax deductible, but the growth is tax free. That's the way I think it works now.
The way it works is there are actually 2 tax advantages. You can get a tax deduction for contributions made on an annual basis.
Very little though, it's not the whole thing.
Well, it depends on how much you put in. It's $5,000 if you file singly. It's up to $5,000 filing singly, up to $10,000 if you file a joint account. So
it's not federal, it's state.
State.
No federal tax, that's what I'm talking about.
That's correct.
There's no federal, yeah.
But once it's in there, so you get an Alabama tax advantage on the deduction going in.
Alabama, not federal.
That's right. And while it's in there, it is tax deferred.
I knew that.
So you pay no taxes on the growth. When you withdraw it, if you pay qualified education expenses, there's no cost, there's no tax on that either. So it is, it's the best way to save for college education today.
Well, I'm doing that, but when my granddaughter gets time to go to college, she goes to, say, a college in Alabama, a state school.
Yes.
Do I have control? Does the money come straight out of my account into the University of Alabama or Troy University, wherever she's going, or do I get to write the check out of my money? Do I say, okay, give me $10,000, I'm going to pay for her dorm and her tuition with this check?
Yes.
It doesn't come straight from the fund to the University of Alabama or Troy University or anything.
No.
It comes to me, and I write as a proprietor who put the money in there. I say, give me $15,000. It's going to cost her this much for her freshman year, and I say, her tuition's $10,000. I write a check for that, and $5,000 for her dorm. I'm in charge of that.
It comes out of that account.
Yeah, as long as I show I wrote it for that school.
Yes, and you'll have to match up qualified expenses with the expenses.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
It's very flexible. And, the other thing that people don't realize is that the PAC program covered only tuition and fees. The 529 account covers everything.
Right.
So
yeah.
it'll cover computers, it'll cover room and board, plus it can also be used for graduate education. A lot of the prepaid
could not undergraduate.
Undergraduate only. Yeah. So it's got great
So
flexibility.
if she were real smart, got a college scholarship, something, didn't use all of her money, I can do it for graduate school.
You could do that. And if she didn't use it all, and you had another grandchild, you could change the beneficiary, and they would be the beneficiary of the remaining amounts.
But whoever puts the money that owns the thing is a proprietor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he's the account owner.
Well,
Yeah.
you've done a good job investing the money on this 529. And
It has done well. We're quite pleased with it. And the other program that we're responsible for is the PAC program. And of course, it ran into some financial difficulty back about 6 to 8 years ago. And it has struggled. That was one of the first things I had to work on when I got to the Treasurer's office. And I'm proud to say that we have reached a milestone just in the last week. We were in financial difficulty. We had to go into a settlement to be able to get to a point where we could establish assets and liabilities, make them equal, and then say this is what we can pay to the account holders. And what we did was we struck it at the 2010 tuition and fee rates, and they're going to be straight line from now on. Well, we've been managing the program since that very beginning. And also I might point out is that in the settlement agreement, we wrote in there that if at some time in the future, the board of directors in its sole discretion, if they saw that the actuarial position of the program was in good shape, that we could actually increase the amount that we're going to pay out.
Good.
And on Monday of last week, the board voted to increase the payout by 3%.
Wow.
So it is, it's a beginning. It is terrific news for the contract holders and the students and the beneficiaries, so we are pleased with it. Now, the work's not over. One of the things that happened when all of this was put together back in 2010 is that there was $548 million that was identified that would be paid into the PAC program by the legislature. It's not just a pool of $548 million. It was a stream of payments that were very irregular. One of the problems that we've always been looking at is that in 2019, we might have gone negative. Well, what's happened is that we have run the program so well, and the numbers have turned out so good, is that we are now positive for 2019, and that's why we could give an increase.
Oh, great.
One of the things that we're doing is we're working with the legislature to maybe make it better, and that is in 2019, we're supposed to get $55 million. In 2020, we're supposed to get 88. Well, that's a huge jump for the ETF. The people in charge of the ETF would like to avoid that. And in discussing it with them, we're talking to them about reducing the 88 million, but moving it forward to 17, 18, and 19 so that we have a bigger cushion and we might have the opportunity to increase the payout again.
Good.
So we got some great news for folks today, and we hope we have great news for them in the future.
Well, that is good news. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Our time's up, Young. We appreciate you viewers being with us today on Alabama Politics. We thank our guest, State Treasurer, and sharing this good news about the Treasurer's Office with us today. We hope you viewers tune again next week for Alabama Politics. Thank you very much. Thank you, Young.
You're welcome.